You know that moment when you wish for something for a long time, building up massive expectations for it, and once it actually happens, it turns out to be kinda disappointing? That's what the Obi-Wan series has turned out to be in a way. Because for a long time, I thought the idea of seeing Obi-Wan and what he was up to for the last 20 years between episodes 3 and 4 was interesting. And so we finally got a peek into that and what he was doing during that time. Sadly, it only seemed that certain parts of it were interesting or even consistent to me. The show flip-flops between interesting stuff like Obi-Wan's life on Tatooine and how depressing it is, to the idiotic chases with Leia, and then back to great with the first encounter with Vader, and then back to bad with all the stuff that happens in episode 4, and then it just gets really difficult to keep up with, to the point where I almost don't know how to feel about it entirely. But to get this whole thing started, Obi-Wan himself was great. It was amazing to see Ewan McGregor back in the role and how he was able to come into his own again really well. His arc from being cut off from the Force and depressed after what happened in episode 3 to becoming a sort of Jedi again was nice to see. It makes sense for his character, especially with him blaming himself for what happened. His acting here was top notch and shined brightest when he was dealing with Vader, especially in the finale. Though his personal story to me gets a little muddy during the show, as it's having to balance with other characters' arcs, and I'd fix that personally by having each episode start with a flashback with his time with Anakin, to help further display the depression he's in now, and since it'd be a good juxtaposition to his current status, and perhaps have a certain message that's carried through the episode. Sorta like the Book of Boba Fett, but not as long or as intrusive. Especially since the one flashback we do get feels a little out of place to me, since it's the only one with him and Anakin in the show, and it's only in the second to last episode. At first, I was super iffy about her inclusion in the show, but having Leia here was actually a pretty interesting choice. I was super impressed by Vivian Lyra Blair's performance here. She legitimately felt like a child version of Leia. She had the confidence, she had the rebellious spirit, and she had the I'm not gonna take any shit from anyone attitude. She was wonderful, and before anyone says she was annoying, no shit. She's a 10-year-old, and 10-year-olds, last time I checked, can be annoying. I don't think it's fair to compare her character 10 years from where she is now, since she's not fully developed yet, and she hasn't been through a ton of the experiences she's gonna go through. Which brings us to Reva, the new Star Wars character for fans to hate and harass the real-life actress for, because they have nothing better to do than just be assholes who need to go outside and touch grass. I don't hate her whatsoever. I'm just frustrated with her potential, since it wasn't fully utilized here. The idea of a surviving youngling from Order 66 becoming an Inquisitor to get close and kill Vader was a great idea to me, honestly, and it's probably one of the most interesting character backgrounds since Finn. The issue is that we aren't told about this important information about her character until the second to last episode, which makes her motivation feel like it came out of nowhere, honestly. Like, her sudden redemption in the end didn't even feel very earned, and it was a little rushed, personally. Her backstory needed to be sprinkled out better throughout the show to give the audience a better understanding of her character than just angry Sith lady who's really mad. Like, give us hints to her backstory, like in the opening scene, and allow the audience to piece everything together by the finale. If the show was trying to make her a fully fleshed out character, then it needed to present way more of her backstory and in a more effective way. The better option, for me at least, would have been to replace her character with a Vader. Say what you will about Disney's handling of Star Wars as a whole, but the one thing they haven't screwed up is Darth Vader. The best parts here are when he's on screen. He absolutely steals the show, from pulling ships down to the ground, breaking people's necks, or roasting Obi-Wan harder than Uncle Owen did. Even the last duel between Vader and Obi-Wan was the best scene in the show for me, with it perfectly displaying where these two characters are now and the emotions they carry with them. Plus, it was nice seeing Hayden Christensen getting a second chance at the character again, and especially in the flashback scene with Anakin himself. On a quick side note, if you noticed during the show that Vader sounded more like Return of the Jedi James Earl Jones,
you don't know the power of the dark side,
and not Rogue One James Earl Jones,
be careful not to choke on your aspirations, Director.
Apparently this is because they're using previous audio recordings of his voice through the same tech they used to recreate Luke's voice in the Book of Boba Fett. It is honestly getting really scary now to see how far this stuff has gotten. Like, it sounds almost exactly like Jones's earlier performances. Whether this is ethical or not is up for debate, and I may be talking about this kind of stuff in the future. Anyways, back to the characters. And besides Obi-Wan, Leia, Reva, or Vader, I don't really remember any of the others at all. Tala was barely given any background besides the mention of how she had to kill people and felt bad. without any other elaboration or even showing us a flashback. Roken just felt like any other dirty, rough rebel leader, and he was just like Andor from Rogue One. And again, they told us about his backstory rather than showing us. The only other side character I enjoyed somewhat was Kumail Nanjiani as a con artist pretending to be a Jedi, but he was barely in the show and he felt very underutilized, honestly. And I really didn't love or hate any of these characters. They were all just a very big meh to me. The production value of this show was so inconsistent, at points looking as good as The Mandalorian in the films, but then it could look so cheap with certain aspects, just feeling so out of place. The best example of this is definitely the action sequences, where they're small scale and not too grand, which works better with the personal level stories that they're trying to do right now, but then they have some pretty shoddy in-fight scene choreography. The entirety of the goons chasing Leia was one of the most hilariously bad on-foot chases I have ever seen. Why they didn't just have someone come from behind her and put a bag over her head, getting it over with real quick, I have no idea. And although I kinda like the first fight between Kenobi and Vader, there are some pretty questionable decisions in it. Like what the hell is that? Hell, even some of the awesome moments, there was some really weirdly done CGI, like here. Like, I don't know why it looks like that. Why does it look like that? And the camera work was really bad. Like, it's not super noticeable at first, but over the course of the show, almost every single shot is using the handheld technique. Using it in action sequences is one thing, but it gets really distracting, especially when it's characters just talking to each other or looking at stuff. And once you notice it, you can't unsee it. There just needed to be more camera techniques implemented in order to make certain scenes land better, or at the very least visible, because it just looks really unprofessional to me, especially when you have it shaking everywhere where I can't even see what's going on. It's really awkward. Writing, though, was the biggest issue here, because it seemed like the writers had no idea how to make the story longer without artificially drawing it out. Because they have to do dumbass things, like letting Reva somehow beating Leia to the escape ship, even though Leia had about a 10 to 15 minute head start, Vader not going around the fire in order to get Obi-Wan, and a lot of other really idiotic things that made no sense. Episode 4, why didn't TIE fighters just shoot down the ships that were escaping with Obi-Wan and Tala and Leia? I have no idea. Why didn't Vader's ship go after the rebels and then Vader personally went after Obi-Wan? I have no idea. There are a lot of questionable writing decisions in this show. But the perfect example of why this show is so frustrating to me is undoubtedly its finale, because it starts off really bad, with Reva somehow getting to Tatooine in just a few hours after she was stabbed, and in the next scene, Vader not going after the rebels, and then letting his ship, yada, I just said that. But then it gets really good with the Obi-Wan and Vader rematch, which I thought was great. But then it still uses a lot of cuts and shaky cam, which pissed me off. But anyways, they then kill that momentum and almost break canon when they switch to Reva going after Luke during a fight. Like, I don't know who thought that was a good idea, why that needed to happen, but it really did not. Then the show wrapping itself up in a semi-satisfying way with fan service aplenty, making it seem better than it actually was to people. And unfortunately, I didn't really fall for that. I'm not as impressed. And after this show, it kinda was the first time in Star Wars where I just said, did this need to happen? Because it rode the line so closely to breaking canon and didn't excel at anything in particular. Though what the future holds for this show or what Disney plans to do with the characters going forward, I don't know. If there is a season 2, I hope they keep it small, with Obi-Wan just doing training with Qui-Gon or something. No Vader, Empire, none of that. But it just wouldn't make sense at that point. There's not much you can do with the Kenobi character now, especially with the small time gap there is between now and episode 4. So why bother, really? Well, I mean, except for... We're in the money! We're in the money! But anyways, Obi-Wan Kenobi for me gets a 5 out of 10, which is average for me. This isn't a terrible score. I don't hate the show, but it does enough right and enough wrong to keep me from fully enjoying it or downright not liking it at all. The show to me has higher highs than something like the Book of Boba Fett, but at the same time can have equal lows just like it, which makes it so frustrating, especially knowing what we could have gotten from this and the amount of great ideas here. I do hope to see McGregor and Christensen back in the Star Wars universe in the future. They both did great jobs here, and their characters are getting way more attention and love than they did beforehand. But until then, I don't really know. I'm very iffy about Andor and Ahsoka now. I pray they can stick to landings, but with the last 2 Star Wars shows, I don't have as much faith.